In our last video, we left off with this section here of the 1100 block of Military Street. But before we go any further down the block, let's go behind where White Studios were and see what was there at this location. This would be on the southwest corner of 4th Street and Wall Street. In 1858, a year after Port Huron's incorporation as a city, 40-year-old William Jinks left Oakland County and opened a foundry and machine shop on the south side of town. The shop, which employed about 10 men, burned in 1861. But Jinks was back in business a year later with his son, Huron, as a partner. They built Phoenix Iron Works at this location into one of the city's most successful enterprises. In this map, you can see White's photo gallery there on the upper left-hand corner, and Phoenix was right behind it. In this photo here, you can see the signage on the side of the building that says Phoenix Iron Works. And as we zoom out, you can see the folks that they had working for them. By 1883, they had 75 men working for them. And it looks like they got all of them to pose for this photograph. Looks like some children here on the end. I wonder if they worked for them too. Phoenix Iron Works built many things, all types of parts and many patents that they designed themselves. But the item they were known for most was the steam engines that they built for some of the finest ships on the Great Lakes during the wooden ship era. And everything they built had their stamp on it. And I found this photograph, which is quite rare, and it does show that the Phoenix Iron Works stamp is on it. It's a little hard to read, but it's there. And the steam engines were so successful that Mr. Jinks had one of those moments with the light bulb over his head. And he thought, well, since I'm doing such a good job on these engines, why not build the ships too? And that's what he did. On Christmas Eve, 1890, father and son went to the county's clerk office to file articles of association for the Jinks Shipbuilding Company. Other co-founders was Orrin's son, William Jinks, and Angus Carpenter, a successful coal and lumber dealer. He was a very successful shipbuilder until he wasn't. There were several reasons for that, one being the shortage of steel, another being how small the river was that he launched his ships on. And of course, this didn't help either after they built their first passenger ship, the Eastland, and how it sank right at the dock in Chicago. But again, we covered this in a previous video. The Jinks Yard would launch one more ship in 1903. It was the last of 14 large steel ships built at the yard. In late 1905, the partners put up a for sale sign. Sidney Jinks took a new job as engineer for a company that built cheap automotive engines, and they built them at the very same plant. His son Stephen would follow him into engineering and retire as executive vice president in charge of research for U.S. Steel. You see in this map from 1945 that this building became a bus barn for the Port Huron City buses. And of course it said in the map that it only had room for 9 buses. Across the street from the location we've been looking at, we find this building here. It's not often you find the history of the building written on the side of the building, but that's the case here. You can see that at one time it was the Howard Furniture Warehouse. Before that, on the other side of the building, you see Port Huron Artificial Ice Company. The words artificial ice piqued my interest, so I did a little research. Before the days of electric refrigerators, people kept perishable foods in ice chests cooled by blocks of ice. In this advertisement, we see one of these ice boxes, and of course this one here is a deluxe ice box. You can see this one is set up against the wall, and there was a hole cut in the wall, and the iceman would just come in, put the ice from the outside, open the door, and put it right inside the ice box. They didn't have to go in the house. But most homes, including mine, we had the ice box that just stood in the room, and the ice had to be brought in the house on tongs by the iceman and put inside the ice box. But for most of Port Huron's early history, the ice was harvested from frozen lakes and rivers. In the photo you're looking at now, they're cutting ice out of the Black River. Keep in mind, these were blocks of ice that were going to go into the ice box, not into your iced tea. After 1909, natural ice was supplemented and then totally replaced by artificial ice, so named because it was manufactured rather than gathered. Whenever people heard the news about artificial ice, they were astonished, and some simply could not believe it was true. There's a story about a country preacher in 1902 who visited an ice plant in Jackson, Mississippi, seeing for himself that humans were making ice. Upon sharing this news with his congregation when he returned home, the good people of his faith decided either the preacher had lost his mind or had been taken in by the devil himself. They kindly asked him to step down from his post for making such an outlandish statement that ice could be made in Mississippi in July. Competition to those companies that were selling artificial ice started to put signs on the side of their wagon saying standard ice or lake ice. But people finally accepted artificial ice, especially in the Deep South. Speaking of the Deep South, a physician from Florida by the name of John Gorey has spent more than 5 years tinkering with a mechanical refrigeration machine, a contraption that could make both ice and cool air. For years he had used it in his infirmary to make his fever patients more comfortable. Dr. Gorey's artificial ice machine would be patented in London and the United States, and the doctor would largely forego his practice, devoting himself to promoting his device. This statue of Dr. John Gorey sits in Statuary Hall, the capital of the United States. An air-conditioned capital, I might add. Of course, when Port Huron Artificial Ice Company was making ice at this location, the machinery had advanced and looked more like this. If we wander down to the end of the block, which would be the northeast corner of 4th and Court, we come to this building right here. And over the years, there's been several different businesses. The two major businesses we'll look at today. The first one is that it used to be Watson Brothers Plumbing and Heating. John Watson began his plumbing business in 1898 at his bicycle repair shop at 175 Elmwood. 4 generations later, the family owned and operated this location right here at 325 Court. Of course, in between the bicycle shop and the location on Court Street, they were at several other locations, including one on the 500 block of Huron Avenue and one also on the 500 block of Quay Street. Over the 4 generations Watson Brothers have been in business, we have a pretty good pictorial history of at least their service vehicles, including this one here. Then, of course, this one here that was earlier. And this one here that was much earlier. And it goes all the way back to this vehicle here. There's no signage on this vehicle, but it was a Watson Brothers, and they were putting radiators in the new Port Huron High School at the time. Watson Brothers are still in business. They are now on Electric Avenue. I changed the view of this building a little bit, coming from the opposite direction, so that you could compare it a little better to the next business that we're going to look at, and that's Port Huron Creamery Company. They were originally in the 700 block of Lapeer Avenue, and then they moved over to this location. And you can see it's the same building, but you can see there's been some changes over the years. Windows have become doors, and pedestrian doors have become delivery doors. The biggest change they made, however, was the fact that when they originally moved there, it was just a single-story building. And then they had the second story on as business increased. Also, if you look right behind this building, you'll see another building, a little taller one on the upper right-hand corner. And as you can see from this map, they took up almost the whole block because of the fact that they had the milk depot behind this building. In this photograph here, you see a lot of machinery out in front of the creamery. This is well digging equipment. The fellow sitting in the car is John Campbell, who was the owner of the well digging company. And then the fellow on the far right with the well equipment is his son Elmer. Here's a photograph about 1923 while they were digging a well for the Port Huron Creamery. Actually, John Campbell's son, J.P., Fred T., and Elmer all operated well digging business in St. Clair County. Alright, let's go back up Court Street to Military Street and finish off that side of the block. There's not much more there. The farther south we go, the less photographs that we have. There's a couple of things I want to point out. First thing I want to point out is that this street here is now paved and quite wide, but Court Street was one of the last streets that was actually paved. In this photo here, you can see the actual bricks that were laid originally on the Port Huron streets. And you can see the road's a little narrower as well. Over the years, there were several different businesses that completed this block, none of any historical value really. Right next to this yellow building at one time was Jake's Tire. And I don't have a real good picture of Jake's Tire. I have this little ad here. But in the next block, I do have a good picture because they moved later to that block, and you can get a pretty good idea of what it looked like. You can see by this map there was also a hotel at this location right next to this one we've been looking at. And originally it was the Rose Hotel and later became the Mertz Hotel. As far as the very corner of this block, there were several gas stations on that corner over the years. And there was also a place called Dino's Pizza. And you can see here, I never really had any other pictures of this block on that corner, and this is the only picture I have of that corner, so I'm sure there were other things there as well. In our next video, we'll walk across the street and see what there is on the west side of this block.